DMRs in PUBG are the go-to long-range weapon for competitive and pro players. Unlike bolt actions, which require a short cooldown between shots, DMRs can throw medium to high levels of damage downrange in a short span of time, making them deadly efficient for taking down players quickly. So in this video, we'll be going over everything from bullet velocity, recoil patterns, and some general practice tips. So by the end of this video, you'll be more educated on DMRs and know how to use them more proficiently. First, let's look at the different ammo types for DMRs. Starting with 5.56 DMRs, which are the current meta among comp and pro players. They offer faster bullet velocity, usually have less recoil. 5.56 is also lighter than 7.62, which allow you to carry more utility and healing items. And when compared to 7.62 DMRs, you're trading accuracy for damage. When looking at 7.62 DMRs, they tend to have slower bullet velocity, a higher amount of recoil. Ammo is also incredibly heavier. Out of all the 7.62 DMRs, the Dragunov is the only one considered meta currently due to its ability to one-tap a level 2 helmet within 100 meters. Bullet velocity, in short, is the speed a bullet travels when fired, which is one of the most important aspects of understanding how DMRs work. Bullet velocity can be broken down into two categories: initial bullet velocity, meaning how fast the bullet travels when initially fired, and velocity over distance, how fast and how far the bullet travels, which impacts damage to its target. Due to 5.56 DMRs having faster bullet speed, on average they will hit their target faster than 7.62 DMRs. But the farther the target is, 5.56 DMRs start to lose velocity and damage, while 7.62 DMRs carry a higher level of damage over long distances. Since every DMR has a different level of initial bullet velocity and velocity drop-off, each also has their own optimal effective range. If you want to get a side-by-side comparison of DMRs, I would heavily suggest checking out Wacky Jacky's site, PUBGweapons.com. On his website, you can review all the stats for every weapon class, including DMRs, what their effective range is, how they do against certain types of armor, and at different ranges. Next, we're going to be reviewing all of the spray patterns for every DMR, where I did 9 sprays for every DMR. I tried to do 10. Sadly, I couldn't fit them all on screen. I did this with no scopes and no attachments. I shot them at a slow and steady fire rate, trying to simulate how most players would fire them in a game. And then we'll review every spray pattern against a control line. Starting with the QBU, which was sadly removed from every map and restricted only to Sanhok. The QBU has the same exact stats as the Mini 14, but surprisingly has the least amount of recoil compared to every other 5.56 DMR. When compared to the control line, you can see a majority of the sprays for the QBU actually favored going up and to the right, which was actually a surprising pattern seen in most 5.56 DMRs. The Mini 14 showed the greatest consistency in horizontal and vertical recoil within the first 3 to 4 shots. And when all 9 sprays are measured against our center control line, we can see the recoil is just like the QBU and favors going up and to the right. The MK12 out of all the 5.56 DMRs has the greatest amount of vertical recoil, and while it does tend to have the most consistent horizontal patterns, we do see that most sprays tend to favor the right side of our center control line, once again kind of showing that when you shoot 5.56 DMRs on top of having to handle the horizontal bounce, there's a greater chance of the recoil going up and to the right, which you can counteract by pulling diagonally in the opposite direction. Not saying you should do this every time you fire a 5.56 DMR, but as you practice more, it's just something that becomes more of a natural feel as you become more in sync with how these guns shoot. Now with 7.62 DMR, starting with the SKS. The SKS was kind of a mixed bag and did not show a lot of consistencies between all 9 sprays. While it did exhibit a lot of horizontal shift in between shots, but when put up against our center control line, it was the most consistent both horizontally and vertically, aside from 1 to 2 spray patterns. The SLR, on the other hand, was all over the place, and by far showed the greatest amount of inconsistencies between all DMRs tested here. While some sprays had heavy horizontal bounce, others didn't, and it just kind of went all over the place. And last but not least, the Dragunov, which I was actually fairly surprised to see that the Dragunov actually had the least amount of horizontal deviations across all the DMRs. And while it does have an insane amount of vertical recoil, all that's really required is a heavy pull down vertically with minor adjustments to compensate for the horizontal bounce. And when comparing all sprays side by side, you can really see why the Mini 14, MK12, and Dragunov are all meta. The Mini 14 with its predictable recoil patterns and insanely fast initial bullet velocity, followed by the MK12, which beats Mini 14 in damage per bullet and fairly consistent recoil. And then we have the Dragunov with its incredibly consistent horizontal patterns, with its ability to one-tap a level 2 helmet within 100 meters. The one gun that actually surprised me more than anything else was the QBU, because it has the same exact stats as the Mini 14, just less vertical recoil. Scope zoom is something that I feel like a lot of players tend to ignore. When using your middle mouse and scrolling to the highest magnification possible, it does add an increased amount of recoil. That, when shooting at a faster rate of fire, can make DMRs a little harder to control. In the side-by-side comparison, you can really see how much the recoil increases when you're zoomed in all the way. So if you feel like you've been missing a lot of your shots with your DMR, remember to gauge the distance that your enemy is at and the level of zoom that your scope is currently in, as that can affect your accuracy. Another helpful tip is that regardless of your magnification level on your scope, there's no additional changes that need to be made when calculating for bullet drop. For example, if you are zoomed in all the way on a 6x scope and you have to use the second line down on your reticle, you can achieve the same level of accuracy when zoomed in all the way using that same line. And since the level of zoom does impact the amount of recoil that your DMR has, this can make hitting your targets a little easier. Especially since the first 2 bullets out of a DMR are typically the most accurate regardless of zoom level. As you can see in this example, the first 2 shots are pretty close together, but as I continue to shoot, the gaps spread significantly. Now moving on to some general practice tips for DMRs, starting with warming up. For this, we're going to go into the training grounds, and at the 800 meter range, we're going to start by shooting both stationary and slower moving targets. Initially, pace your shots to get a little more comfortable and increase your fire rate and your zoom levels as you continue. The goal here being to practice accuracy first, then speed. The next thing we're going to practice is tracking. For this, we're going to stay on the 800 meter range and solely focus on the strafing targets that are 150 to 250 meters. Here we're going to be focusing on crosshair placement and leading our shots. This is where you need to be mindful of your current bullet velocity on your DMR, as that does impact how much you have to lead on your target. Also try practicing with different scopes and zoom levels until you feel comfortable. And since shooting targets is never the same as shooting a real player, in the training grounds, get yourself to a nice elevated spot and just practice on the players running around. Since their movement is always going to be super random, and it gets you more accustomed to a real player's hitbox. The next tip is going to be practice shooting your DMR while standing. I would bet to say that you are shooting more out of a window, over a ledge, or over a hilltop more than you are crouching. You're not always going to be in a situation where you're going to be crouched and have an easy shot. And because recoil is greatly increased when standing, this is incredibly important to practice. Practicing pixel perfect accuracy. How many times have you run into somebody who has perfect cover, whether that be behind a folded shield or shooting out of a small sliver of a window that you can barely see? These are incredibly hard shots to hit, and you need to make sure that your center reticle is right on target, especially for those first 2 shots. This is where having pixel perfect accuracy with your DMR is incredibly important, because if you're not able to confidently hit a small target within the first 2 to 3 shots, more than likely the other player will. For this, we're going to be practicing using the red and green flip targets at the 800 meter range. Start with the flip targets at 25 meters. While this may seem very easy, the goal here is just to establish initial crosshair placement. Once you're able to shoot those with ease, let's move to the flip targets out at 350 to 400 meters. We're going to do the same practice here, just shooting each flip target either in sequential or random order. Really, it's up to you. And since we usually lean when shooting DMRs, make sure to incorporate leaning left or right while shooting as well. This is another one of those practices that you really have to start off slow and increase your fire rate as you begin to feel more comfortable. This is one of those practice routines that I guarantee you that if you're able to hit these targets confidently, you will start to see this transfer over in game. Just remember to be patient and pace yourself. And that's going to do it for this DMR guide. I greatly appreciate your guys' patience on this. Making these videos is an incredibly fun hobby of mine, and thank you guys for the support as always. If you found this video helpful, please feel free to like and subscribe for more PUBG content. And if you feel so inclined, come check out the stream on the weekend. Usually we're having a good time there. I appreciate you guys, and I will see you on the next one.